I've experienced an earthquake in the US, but as far as I know, there's never been anything significant in Australia. Has there?
I don't think you need to worry about earthquakes at all.
We've had earthquakes, and I think there's quite likelihood that there could be others. So I think it's ignorance is never bliss.
We don't have many here, but when we do, I suppose it's a good one, yeah.
The floor started to wave, and it was a definite roll, you know, like a wave.
I think the power went off, and the only way we could hear what was going on was to access it through the car radio.
And the ladder was moving because these guys were trying to hold on to it, you know, up 3 stories.
Yeah, she was near a solid wooden door, and I think it was the only thing that saved her life. Because as the building went down, she ended up, the door was like that, and she ended up there.
I think when the earthquake hit, all these awnings just fell down. They weren't basically structurally sound to hold the weight of the awning.
I don't think you could ever go through something like that, you know, and not be unscathed.
In the past 100 years, approximately 20 earthquakes of similar or greater strength than this one at Newcastle have caused damage in Australia. Luckily, most of the other earthquakes have been in areas of low population density, so there's been no loss of life and relatively little property damage. Any part of Australia could experience an earthquake. The red areas of the map show those parts that are most likely to experience one. The yellow area could also be affected. The black dots are where earthquakes have been recorded in the last 160 years. To find out if your area has ever had an earthquake, check with your local council, state or territory emergency service, neighbours, or your insurance company. And check that your insurance does cover you for damage caused by an earthquake. Geology and soils under your house affect your vulnerability. You should seek expert advice when building in an area with even a low risk of earthquakes, as the design of the building and type and depth of footings may be critical. In Newcastle, as well as foundation soil problems, many of the buildings that suffered the worst damage were old, poorly maintained or not built to earthquake standards. This meant they fell apart more easily once the shaking started. So to reduce your vulnerability to damage from earthquakes, the condition of your buildings should be checked. Look for cracks in walls and gaps in mortar between bricks. Replace any mortar that's deteriorated or fallen out between the bricks in walls and chimneys. You may need a builder to check if they need repair, extra support, or tying together at the corners. Whether your home is old or new, it's important to keep it well maintained. Buildings made of wood and steel are considered to be more earthquake resistant as long as they are well maintained. These buildings are flexible and so they bend. But they're not safe if other buildings are very close, as the swaying to and fro can damage each adjoining building. To further reduce your vulnerability to earthquake damage and injury, look around the house for things that could fall over or be shaken from a wall or ceiling if there was strong shaking. Make sure these things are well secured and not positioned above chairs or beds. Keep your breakables and heavy objects on the bottom shelves. And if you put strong latches on cupboard doors, they'll stay closed during the shaking. Flammable or hazardous liquids like paints, pesticides and cleaning products should also be on the bottom shelves or in cupboards with strong latched doors. Have an emergency kit in the home. This should include a portable radio with spare batteries. It could be your only source of information if the power goes off and the phones aren't working. A powerful torch with spare batteries, a first aid kit and manual, and a list of emergency numbers by the phone or on the fridge. These should include police, state or territory emergency service, fire service, ambulance, electricity supplier, gas company, water supplier, and insurance company. It's very hard to predict an earthquake, so it's best to be prepared and to know what to do if one happens wherever you are. So, what do you do if an earthquake happens? Whether you're in a single or multi-storey building, stay inside in the strongest part of the room. This could be in a corner against the inside walls, under door frames or strong archways. If in a doorway, hold on to the door, or under a strong desk, bench or table. If under a table, hold on to the legs. Don't run outside. You could be hit by falling debris. Stay away from windows, overhead fittings and tall shelving. And don't get into lifts. If outside, stay away from anything that could fall on you, including walls, bridges, power lines, trees, and awnings. Try to get to an open space. If you're driving, stop in an open area until the shaking stops and listen to your car radio for warnings before moving. And following an earthquake, if you hear this sound on your radio or television, you're about to hear an urgent safety message, such as a warning of aftershocks and evacuation. So stop and listen, then act on the advice given. It could save your life. Your chances of surviving an earthquake are very good if you're well prepared and know what to do. Most people are killed or injured as they try to move prematurely from shelter during the earthquake, and they're struck by falling objects. Landslides, like earthquakes, are more common than we think, and they can and do kill. In just 18 months, from September 1996 to February 1998, 33 people died in landslides in Australia. The greatest loss of life was at Gracetown and Thredbo. 9 people were killed near a small coastal town in Western Australia when a 14-metre-high limestone sea cliff collapsed on spectators at a school surf carnival. And 18 people died in an alpine village when a large section of steep mountainside collapsed and slid rapidly down the slope.
Rescue workers here are still battling to free 20 people trapped by a landslide. A wall of mud and water buried 2 ski lodges shortly before midnight.
Many people said both disasters could have been prevented because they believed there had been evidence that this could happen. So what sorts of evidence could there be? And how can you assess your vulnerability to landslides?
If you're wondering if you're in an area where you may have problems with landslides, the first thing to do is to check with your local council and have a chat to your neighbours. See if there's any anecdotal evidence of a landslide. Other things you can do is you use your eyes and you look around you. If you're in a non-built-up area, you can look for things like tilting trees. Usually they tilt downhill, but they can tilt in any direction. Another thing is disturbed or lumpy topography. That can be the sign of a landslide. Another thing you can look for are breaks in the ground. Where you get landslides, they have to pull away where they start sliding, and you can get step-like features or cracks in the ground. If you are in a built-up area, you can look for things like cracks in the road. You can look for cracks in walls and cracks in the walls of houses. Another thing that you can look for in built-up areas are displacements in curbs or fence lines, because the ground's moving and it doesn't necessarily all move at the same rate. Another thing to look for too is if you've got road batters or cuttings, see if there are any rocks or soil falling from them, because that can be indication that there is instability in the ground. Also, Most landslides are triggered by water. Water tends to make the ground slide more easily, so another danger sign can be seepages in hillsides. One thing you've got to be careful with, though, is that just about any one of these signs can be caused by other things. So if you see them, you mightn't be having problems with a landslide, but it's well worth asking some more questions.
Always take notice of signs warning you of loose rocks and debris, and be very careful near boulders, rock ledges and overhangs, and the tops and bases of cliffs or embankments. They could be unstable, especially if there's been heavy rain. If they're sandstone, they can double in weight with water, so they're gradually weakened until they can collapse from the extra weight. Digging or tunnelling into banks or under boulders can start a landslide. Something as simple as children digging a tunnel into a sand dune at the beach could cause instability, and they could be buried. This house was built on unstable ground. It's being damaged by a slow-moving landslide. Landslides can be exceptionally slow, maybe only a few centimetres a year, or they can be sudden and violent, like the one in this hillside suburb, where a railway embankment collapsed onto a house, killing a woman and her young son. A sudden landslide may be marked by a loud sound, like an explosion or a rumble, but often there'll be no time to plan what to do. So to reduce your vulnerability, let all your family know what they should do if they're caught in a landslide. So what do you do if a landslide happens? If you're inside, get out of the building and out of the path of the landslide, provided you have time to escape. If you can't get out of the building in time, shelter at the downslope end of the building under a strong table, desk or bench. Not only will this protect you from debris, it could also create an air pocket so you can breathe. Stay there until the land movement has stopped. If you're outside when a landslide starts, move quickly across the slope away from the likely path of the landslide and stay clear of trees, power lines and poles in case they collapse. What you should do after a landslide is very similar to the actions you would take after an earthquake. In both cases, even after the main shock has happened, be aware that there could be more movement.
It's like a pack of cards, like a set of dominoes. If you move something, we have to be quite sure that something else isn't going to follow and fall.
There are generally several aftershocks after the main earthquake, and after a landslide, there's often more land movement and instability. So in both cases, you should evacuate if you feel the building is unsafe. Turn off the water, the electricity, and the gas. And don't light matches until you're confident there are no gas or fuel leaks. Presume any fallen power lines are deadly and don't go near them. Be very careful removing material from damaged buildings, as the vibrations could cause more danger. Emergency vehicles will need the roads, so don't use your car unless there's an emergency. And don't go sightseeing. You clog the roads and you make the victims feel worse. As with any major disaster, only make emergency calls. The telephone system could be damaged, so there'd be limited lines available, and they're needed for life-saving emergency calls. And keep listening to your local radio and respond to the warnings and advice. Earthquakes and landslides can be devastating. They can happen at any time and generally with very little warning. But with good preparation of your property and your family, this natural hazard may not become a disaster.
For more information, call one of the following numbers.